Okay, sounds like we are back online. I'll give a few moments for folks to rejoin. For those just tuning in, this is the subcommittee of the Legislative Council related to the pilot on racial impact statements. I am the chair of the subcommittee and the chair of Legislative Council, joined by Senator Daughtry and Representative Talbot Ross. And Representative Dillingham was with us. She might rejoin. I don't know. She took off during our brief break there. And we're also joined by some subject matter experts who have been working on the implementation of, or the pilot rather, of this program as well, from the Permanent Commission and from the University of Maine system. So thank you for your patience as we get that issue resolved. Thank you, Director Fox and Director Bresser, for getting us back in order here. We're good to go, I think. So with that, I know, Sarah, I had cut you short in the middle of a thought. So if you want to pick up where you were headed, I'm more than happy to hand it back off to you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm trying to grab at the strand. So one of the things I wanted to circle back just a little bit, Representative Talbot Ross, to what you had said around, the outcome of a particular bill and what that's kind of the clear question being posed, or the clear purpose of this. I think one of the pieces that was hard when we get down into some of the details, and I think Dr. Johnson might have a little bit more to add because she particularly experienced this, is once you start getting into the nuances of a bill, predicting where that outcome is going to happen or what that outcome will actually look like. In some instances, that's a not entirely known pathway. There's the intention of the bill, and then there may be some pathways that branch off, or even some areas where it's not entirely clear what that outcome may actually be when put into practice. And so that was something that gets a little bit difficult, or got a little bit difficult in trying to put together an impact statement. Well, if the bill goes this way, we think it could go that way. If it goes this way, it could go that way, particularly with some of them that were very comprehensive as well, that might have 6 different pathways, right, that they could go. And so are we looking at each individual pathway? Are we looking at them in a whole? And if we're looking at each individual pathway, in some cases, there was a clear area of data and inquiry that we could follow to craft that impact statement, and other areas where it was much more broad and more challenging. So trying to put that whole question together was difficult. And I think having that conversation with the sponsoring committee or legislator around what is the nut of what you're really trying to get at when you're looking at the racial, wanting to know more about the potential racial impact of this bill, where are the areas of concern, or where are the areas of keen interest where you would really like this process to go, could be a really fruitful part of the process to kind of get a little bit more refined and a little bit more direction in terms of which pathway to follow. And I don't know, Dr. Johnson, if you have more you'd like to.
Well, if I can just put my concrete example on top of what you're saying about the fact that it is always the case that the outcomes are important, but in the bill that I was looking at in particular, there were multiple outcomes, and so that we could have looked at, and so defining earlier on at the beginning which of those outcomes and for what kind of population was where I really struggled. So the bill that I was looking at was about resource allocation, and resource allocation is tremendously important when we're talking about equity in the context of structural racism, right? I mean, this was a great bill to pick in my mind, but then as soon as we go to look at the problem, we say, okay, well, are we thinking about the likely impacts of this legislation on individual students of color, perhaps, or depending on how this particular thing was structured? Because it was an education bill and we're talking about resources, there's also this unit of analysis of school districts. So are we talking about school districts where there might be high proportions of students of color? And then how do we define that? And then the other big impact with this particular bill that I was looking at was on taxpayers. And so the impact of this bill would have been a big stress on taxpayers in certain low-income communities. So how we define that problem and which outcome you wanted me to look at, I tried to look at all of them and only got this far because of that. But depending on which outcome and what kind of impacts and what kind of outcomes we're trying to actually prognosticate, right? Because there is that assumption, like Sarah was saying, on also we have to make an assumption about whether or not those resources will actually flow the way they're intended, and that's an assumption you always have to make. And so I think that you're right, Representative Talbot Ross, that it's pretty clear that we're talking about measuring the outcomes. But there's actually so many outcomes in some cases that's where leaving it to me is too subjective for me, for my comfort to be a policy analyst. I need some of that to be predetermined before it gets to me. And how that gets determined, I don't know if it comes from the bill intent or if it comes from the permanent commission for why the bill has been flagged. But in the long term, I think a little bit more like we're looking for this, if the outcome that we're looking at is named, even though it may, in some cases, it may be self-evident. And in my case, I would say it was not. There also may have been, and back to the question of expertise, the way I defined the question, I had the expertise to answer it. But if it had come to me with like, we're looking for this particular outcome that we think might have a disparate impact, there's a good chance I would have looked at it and said, that actually needs a different kind of expertise than what I could bring to it. And I would be able to say that, but the problem definition and the analytic goal is what I think is the nub here, because it's about who chooses, not just that the bill has been flagged, but this is why it's been flagged for a racial impact analysis. And this is the particular thing that we want analyzed. And that does require, I think, more conversation. And the process I've heard recommended so far feels like it would be a great step in that direction. I'm looking back specifically at Representative Talbot Ross. Is that a little bit clearer? I mean, maybe I am just that ignorant, but I think more it's that there's a lot of definition that happens when we're talking about impacts, because it can happen at many different levels. And particularly in the context of education, at really anything in education, there's impact on individual students versus impact on school districts. And those are going to be different answers in many cases.
No, it does. Speaker Fecto, is it okay to respond? Yeah, thank you. No, that does clarify both what you and Sarah have offered enormously, because as I reflect on the preliminary reports, several of them had stated clearly that while the bill would expand access to these populations, it couldn't conclude whether or not that then would reduce a disparity, an outcome, right? And so for me, that's a great conclusion. It will expand out, it will expand access. That's a great outcome. That's a great piece of information for a policymaker to understand that this particular bill will actually increase access to people who have been subjected to systemic racism. That is a conclusion that I think a policymaker would be able to use. Whether it reduces a disparity, which is what the question was inconclusive because of a number of factors that you, both you and Sarah, have adequately identified. So thank you for that. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you, Speaker Fecto.
And just to add on, I mean, I think another consideration for that particular bill could have been the breakdown of the racial makeup of the educators in these school districts, right? So looking at students is one way of looking at the bill, but also the resources that educators have access to then do their jobs could have also been a way of cracking the nut, if you will. So like there's different ways that, and I think the point raised about getting that direction from the committee, if the committee is requesting that a racial impact statement be produced for a certain bill, having that opportunity to interface with the committee about why it is they've requested that the statement be produced and what they're hoping the focus will be, or trying to get a sense of why they came to the conclusion that the bill was applicable for a racial impact statement. I think that's probably a good way of getting at like what avenue are as a researcher are you set out to pursue versus sort of taking this bill, which is far reaching. I mean, that bill in particular probably is not the greatest example because that's a large scope, but there will be many bills where there's at least 2, 3, 4 avenues where you could probably pursue the question. But if you pursue the route that is not of interest to the committee, then you're not going to conclude. The conclusion will inherently not be of interest to them, even if because it won't answer the question they were hoping to get answered, right? So, or the question that they want answered. So,
Mr. Speaker,
yeah.
I would just add one other ... to that, because I think that's exactly right, what you just offered. And again, in Dr. Johnson's example with LD 270, I would go back to Director Fox with this question, because part of what she states unequivocally in here is that Maine does not systematically collect information on the racial identity of its public school educators. That should be a flag to somebody. But it's not do you know what I'm saying? Like, we're producing a lot of information that doesn't necessarily answer the disparity question, but it really does answer a lot of questions if we're looking at the purpose of the analysis, which is to eliminate the racial inequity. So that piece of information, that we're not collecting information on the race of our public educators, that's really good information for a policymaker. And it's part of the conclusion that would be helpful to a committee, I would hope. It doesn't answer that disparity question, but it does provide a lot of information.
Yeah, I think one of the potential positive outcomes of the racial impact statements is getting an understanding of where there isn't data, right? And that alone can be helpful in, not in the immediate, but certainly down the road of should we make the effort to collect the data to be better decision makers, not just as policymakers, but also as bureaucrats. I mean, when you think about the Department of Education, I think they would probably see that data as useful, and maybe it's something they never thought about collecting. I don't know. So I think there's many different levels of government and outside agencies, nonprofit organizations that would probably stand to benefit from some of the gaps that are currently in existence that might get filled should we put our finger on where those gaps are as a result of this exercise. So a very good point. Any other questions? Senator Daughtry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And not a question, just an apology. I do unfortunately have to run for our weekly staff meeting, and just want to let folks know. And apologies that I was late. The prior meeting ran over, but I look forward to catching up on the recording. And also just want, again, extend my gratitude for being involved in the subcommittee and for this really important process. And just to, once again, echo, I think the one thing that's very clear in all of this is that we have some data gaps. And I think the most important thing on this is showing and highlighting and elevating just how large of a gap we have. And that's why I'm really proud that all of this work is getting underway. And I know that we have a large amount of work to keep doing. So thank you all.
Thank you, Senator. So I'm going to throw out a potential step forward, and Representative Talbot Ross, I guess you and I can discuss it, as we're the only members left of the subcommittee at this point. But I think in the context of what we are communicating to Ledge Council, I think it would be helpful to be pretty definitive. Given that the majority of Ledge Council hasn't been really following this process closely, I think it'd be helpful to give some really concrete direction. My proposal so basically this would be a recommendation for Ledge Council to then recommend to the 131st. So to the extent that that is useful, I mean, the 131st Ledge Council could choose to ignore or change or modify the recommendation, but I think it'd be helpful before legislatures to determine to stamp this in as permanent part of the process of law policy making, to extend the pilot, but to do so more concretely with what I think we would all envision as the actual process in over the long haul. And for me, that seems to be what the Judiciary Committee suggested, which is to have committees identify bills at the beginning of the first regular session. So as they get bills to their committees and they get a sense of what those bills are. And I mean, I think policymakers could also, knowing their bills could flag for chairs of committees as well. Like, hey, this bill's probably going to get referenced to your committee. It hasn't landed there yet. But it might be one of the bills you consider flagging for a carryover to then have a racial impact statement assigned to it. I know we had discussed in earlier meetings how many bills and who determines that. I haven't put my finger on what the best process would be. I recall one state, forget which one, where the presiding officers signed off on racial impact statements as they were requested. That's doesn't seem like a terrible process, is having the presiding officers approve those requests, just as we would approve, off-session committee hearings and so forth. I mean, there's a lot of committee work that gets signed off by the presiding officers on a request basis. And frankly, carryover bills have to be approved by the presiding officers anyway. So perhaps it's just included as part of the carryover request that the bills noted for racial impact statements are denoted as such, and the presiding officers provide approval on the carryover, and they provide approval on bills that get assigned racial impact statement analyses. That would seem to be, like, I think the best process in terms of like the timelines to make sure that the statement actually is useful as they head into the second regular session. In the meantime, though, I do think providing direction to the 131st that the researchers have permission to engage with the committees about what they want the researcher to set out on determining, and making sure that the avenue they pursue is the one that actually provides the most useful path forward. And so again, that might be the researcher talking to the chairs of the committee. It might be the researcher coming before the committee in a public setting where in the off session the committee convenes. I think there's different ways that could look. I don't think we need to prescribe a specific way, but I think making clear that this initial pilot concluded that would be a helpful thing is, I think, important to include in our recommendation to the 131st Ledge Council. Trying to think if I missed anything. Dr. Johnson, I don't know if you have anything you want to chime in and add.
Yeah, I do want to add that I would recommend, and I'm not so awesome on the process and the politics, so I apologize for the times that I've spoken out of turn. The one thing that we didn't get to try in this pilot was the piece of collaborating with the Permanent Commission. So because that was sort of like, we were like, here's step one, and then step one wound up being the step because it was too late in the process. So I would speaking, if one of these was to come my way again, I would want to have a robust collaboration with the Permanent Commission, maybe even before the committee, just because there's an expertise there that I don't have, and that would have enriched the process. And it was, I think, not about I think you got the gist.
Yeah.
I don't know, is it where or when?
I think that's
acknowledging that process of flagging a bill is in my mind inherently a political process. And so how to separate it from, how to get to that place where you make sure there's a bipartisan or a nonpartisan look at it. In my mind, that's not clear, but I think the Permanent Commission may be a key component of that, in my 2 cents. Hope I didn't volunteer you
So
something.
are you envisioning that collaboration occurring once the bill is assigned, or help me think about where do you think that point of collaboration is most useful to you as a researcher, to you with the committee? Is it in discussing? So once, let's say the committee determines, so this LD 706, we want it to be assigned a racial impact statement for the second regular session. We're carrying it over. In August, the committee meets as, you know, in an interim meeting, off session meeting with the researchers before the committee, and the researchers probing the committee for, you know, what it's hoping to gather in terms of information. Is the Permanent Commission then, you know, someone from the Permanent Commission, the executive director, their designee, sitting next to that researcher and also probing the committee and helping, you know, provide answers to questions, and, you know, sort of gathering the intel for then the pursuit of the information that's needed to draw up an impact statement. Maybe both entities continue to work together, the researcher and the commission, in the process of drafting that statement, and then presenting to the committee, both entities together. Is that sort of like that, basically having sort of an almost fused together entity, if you will, the researcher in partnership with the Permanent Commission? Is that, am I capturing?
Yeah, no, I don't know that I actually have a great answer. I think it could go one of 2 ways. The problem that I'm parsing through in my mind is that challenge of who's identified. Like there's a process before the bill has been flagged that feels like it needs, whether it's through Ledge Council or I don't know, but to make sure that the process is not, I mean, we've had some frank conversations about, is there a potential to abuse this process? Like, could somebody try to just, like, you know, like some people will attach a fiscal note to something because they're trying to kill the bill, and they know it delays the process. Like, could, you know, is there a way in the process where you have a piece of making sure that the process itself has been fair and will be productive? So there's the selection process, there's that flagging, and then there's that choosing what's the outcome and developing that analytic plan. And then there's the hand-holding through the actual research process. I think it's actually, the researcher goes away, does a bunch of stuff, brings it back for feedback and an initial reaction. That's what I think it might look like, a little more than constantly hand in hand, because that probably would be annoying and not an efficient use of their time. So whether that role along the way is Ledge Council or OPLA or Permanent Commission, I'm neutral on that. I'm just identifying at a high level where I see some process things that we didn't get a chance to pilot this year, and that I think I would really actually be interested in hearing what the members of the Permanent Commission say. And I also see that Representative Talbott-Ross has her hand up also.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm beginning to understand a little bit more. So, I mean, and I'll turn to Representative Talbott-Ross after I try to communicate my words here, but I think it's impossible to insulate anything from the political process. So I don't think it's worth our time thinking about how do we make sure that any process is going to be free of politics, because that's just not ever going to happen. That is inherently part of the lawmaking process. I don't think we'll find a great way of avoiding that. I think some of the ways that we do mitigate that is by having the committee take a majority vote to determine that they want to sign a bill. I mean, I think that's a fair way of basically insulating to the greatest degree possible. But I do think what I heard you saying that might be helpful is if the Permanent Commission, if they're comfortable with this, would review bills as they're released, you know, because it's a little challenging because bills are constantly being drafted in the beginning weeks of the first session. So you'll have a list of bill titles, and there might be something you can glean from the titles themselves, but the substance of those bills sort of come out in waves. And so it might be challenging for the permanent commission to take a full assessment of all the bills submitted for the first regular session and say, here is our list of bills that we think should get considered for a carryover in a racial impact statement, because the timing might not work out. We might run into the same issue that we've had, which is they're releasing a list, but it's premature or it's too late, one or the other. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. But if it wasn't like the full breadth of bills, but rather just like, as bills are being discussed and people are communicating with each other, the permanent commission takes favor of certain bills, even though it might not be comprehensive, but certain bills that they think should absolutely be on a committee's radar. I think that could be something that could happen. I just think we need to be careful about whether or not we are saying we're charging the permanent commission with gathering the full scope of bills, because I don't think that's going to be truly possible. Morgan.
Oh, I will defer to Representative Talbot Ross and then go
Sure.
after her. She had
No,
her.
what,
Okay.
please go, just so we can
Okay.
finish this stream of
Sure.
of
Yep.
inquiry.
I just wanted to mention that one of the pieces of the DC core process is that when there's a request made to have a bill go through an REIA process, the requester fills out a screening tool, and it's a 7-page worksheet that goes through, these are the questions that need to be answered, these are the factors that should be considered. And I think that gets to a little bit of that process that might be lacking. So that could be something that the permanent commission contributes to, developing a screening tool. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the permanent commission is going through every bill and determining whether it needs to happen, but it's kind of a place where it's a check-in and making sure the right questions are getting asked.
That's a really helpful point. And I did look at that screening tool that was included in the memo you all provided, which I thought was really great, and could be the tool that the committee uses in an interim meeting with the assigned researcher to figure out where they are going. So that could be definitely helpful. And the other thing I wanted to flag from your memo that I think is really important for Ledge Council to consider recommending to the future Ledge Council of the 131st legislature is making sure that there is also the qualitative research, which is speaking to, connecting with people in impacted communities for their feedback on the assigned bill. So I would want to make sure that is included in our recommendation to the 131st too, that whomever is assigned the task of producing the RIS, that they connect with impacted communities for qualitative assessment as well. Representative Talbot Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I didn't know if the executive director for the permanent commission had anything to add before I add my comments. Just wanted to give her that space.
Oh, thank you, Representative Talbot Ross. I was going to flag exactly what Morgan did. And, we have learned a lot from this other jurisdictions process, which, I think is important. And one of the things that we learn is that these folks doing the work in the 2 years that they've been producing the statements, they've produced more than 50 assessments with 4 staff who are more generalist researchers, policy analysts, if you will. That they, you know, play a role in reviewing the key facts and applying them to the bills, and often use national data when they can't find, you know, what is local, but that finding of there is no local data is so important. And so I just wanted to lift up again that we really found that this model could be generative of something that we could use here. And also that, you know, there are resources needed to conduct qualitative data, to conduct qualitative research, and to do this work. And so I want to flag that as well moving forward, that, you know, both entities have flagged that as a challenge, because these do take time, but we think we can make it manageable as well. So thank you for giving me the space.
Representative Talbot Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, Ms. Parrish, for that, because I was just going to add to the suggestion that the speaker made for moving forward, that embedded in that recommendation had to be the allocation of resources, because we were fortunate that both the University of Maine system, including the law school, and the Permanent Commission was willing to offer their services and expertise at no cost to the legislature. But I know that with the intensity that we've seen in the report backs to committees and in your own memos to us, that as Director Fox could probably speak to, this work cannot be done without some more built capacity, and that capacity is dependent upon resources. So I think we have to add that to the recommendation, Speaker Fecteau. The other piece that strikes me that we may need to add is, and I appreciate, Mr. Speaker, that you talked about the communication component of this, the necessary communication between both a sponsor and or a committee with the researcher along the way, and or the Permanent Commission, but that there is a relationship with all of those entities that's really necessary. And I'm not sure, maybe Ms. Gersher can tell us, but it appears to me, if you read the memo from Health and Human Services, in which they're clearly saying that they got an analysis on a bill that had changed 3 or 4 different times. And so the analysis and the bill that they were debating and voting on were 2 different things. And so, Ms. Gersher, I'm asking the question, if in our current rules, those amendments to a bill is somewhat protected until a sponsor wants it to be known. And sometimes that happens right during a work session, right in the moment, live. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but it was really quite clear from that committee that the timing of when they get this and the communication between the sponsor, the committee, the researcher is key. Otherwise, it's an exercise in futility, right? So I just want to add resources, Speaker Fecteau, to your proposal, and then ask the specific question to Director Gersher if there is even a way for us for all of that communication to take place in our current structure.
So thank you, Representative Talbot Ross. I think that timing issue was identified as one of the trickiest pieces of the pilot project. And I believe that is why so many of us took note of the Judiciary Committee's proposal, because what the Judiciary Committee is proposing is that at the beginning of a first regular session, the committee, whichever committees they are, identify the bill that is printed So now it's now no longer the sponsor's bill. It is now belongs to the committee. Before the committee starts its work, before any resources and time are expended on that bill, before there are 4 different proposals on it, it is set aside. It is identified as, we're thinking this would be a perfect bill for a racial impact statement. And the way carryovers normally work are the committees, and Danielle will know this far better than I, the committee chairs, they get together a list, they send it to the presiding officers say yes, and then it's compiled in a carryover order. What I heard the speaker suggesting was that perhaps in a separate section, perhaps as a separate grouping, there are bills that are identified early on that would be appropriate and benefit from a racial impact statement. They are set aside and transmitted to the presiding officers on a list and approved. And it could even be that once a committee knows that a bill would be great for a racial impact statement, there's nothing that would prevent a heads up to the permanent commission, and we may be putting this on a list, or we may be requesting an RIS on this one, so that they could start thinking about it. Heads up to the university so they could start thinking about it, because the carryover order doesn't occur until the very last day of session. That doesn't mean that there isn't that kind of communication of, we've identified these 3 bills as being really critical for getting a racial impact statement. What that does then is it prevents the kind of work, proposals by individuals that, you are correct, would be confidential. It would prevent the committee from working a committee amendment, which would, until it was presented, be confidential. Instead, what the committee would be saying is, we want this needs the additional work. This needs the additional input. This needs the additional information. And it would, I think, get to the very obvious timing issue that it seems as like everyone took note of. I don't know if that answers your question, Representative, but
I would just add a very particular detail to that, and that means it likely would not be scheduled for a public hearing or a work session. I think Suzanne was, presuming that in her response, but it would not have been scheduled for that. So also, when the testimony was received, it would be after the statement was likely produced in the next legislative session. So the testimony on the bill would also take the statement into consideration, because I'm guessing, and with what the speaker's envisioning, that would be complete by the time the bill is taken up in the second session.
And
Yeah.
so the responses would be to the bill request, the printed bill, and the RIS. So what would be responded to would be that package, as opposed to dueling different amendments down different roads.
Mr. Speaker, if I may respond. Thank you. Thank you both for that. It is much clearer. The only kind of caveat I was thinking about as you were talking is, as a bill sponsor, I may not want my bill to wait until that next regular term to be heard. And so I don't know what the authority or where the sponsors, where their own preference for when their bill is heard, in which they work with a committee chair, they work with the presiding officers, they work with the advocates, they work with whomever, whatever that looks like, whatever that stakeholder group, where the decision making, where the sponsor has input on the decision making for when their bill is heard. And so I think I like where we're going. I just know, and Speaker Fecteau can chime in, as a bill sponsor, timing plays a very critical role in the way that we debate certain policies.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge there is like a bill, committee could choose to carry over a bill now, regardless of what a committee sponsor regardless of what the bill sponsor thinks. I mean, I feel like in my time in the legislature, a sponsor, it can be pretty persuasive with the committee to make sure that their bill is heard when they want it to be heard. I mean, it doesn't always happen to a T, but I think, I think if a committee was like, we're going to carry this over and give it a racial impact statement, and a sponsor was like, I absolutely do not want that, I would imagine most of the time the committee will defer to the sponsor and choose to just run the bill. But and then if that doesn't work, I mean, the last ditch effort for the sponsor would be to persuade the presiding officers to decline to approve the bill for carryover. So
Yeah.
there's a backstop option too. Yeah.
I think that process exists pretty much now. It's just different factors which influence it. It's not about a racial impact statement, but as someone who worked with chairs to schedule a lot, I mean, that was always a back and forth. So I think that process is known and well navigated, and people, know how to get around it. So I think that's probably exactly as the speaker described it. It's ingrained in the process already.
And just on the point of just on the matter of resources, did we not set aside funds to contract with outside entities? I forget where that conversation had went last time. And sorry, Dr. Johnson, I just saw your hand was up, so I don't know if you wanted to add an additional point to the previous line of thinking before we move on to my new question.
Well, it's very short. And I was going to say, I hesitate to even say this because I'm realizing how much less knowledgeable I am about the potential process than the folks in the permanent commission that have already looked at this in other states. But just to say, as a researcher, depending on how the question comes to me, I might be able to do it and turn it around more quickly. And there might be other ones that I'd say, oof, that one's going to have to be a carryover. So in my mind, that would be a question mark and wouldn't necessarily have to happen. Based on my experience in this past one, it was, it probably would have leaned that way. But and that also has implications for your question about resources. So I'll bring it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think in an ideal world, I think what you just said is maybe possible, but I just think in the way the nature of the Maine legislature is, it's just never it will almost never work to do the impact statement in the same session in which the bill is proposed, because the nature by which bills come out of committee is, as I said, it comes in waves. The speed at which committees need to conduct their work is very fast paced because we are all running towards a deadline set in the Constitution for us to adjourn. And in many cases, bills get a public hearing, and a week or two later, they're getting their work session, and they're getting a disposition of whatever the committee's decided. So the process, the nature of the Maine legislature, because we are a part-time legislature, not full-time, I just don't think it lends itself very well to a process where an impact statement could be produced in the same session in which the bill is proposed. But maybe I'm wrong. I mean, for context, I think I think it is a huge undertaking just to get the bill analyses to line up when the bills are up for work sessions. And I'm sure Danielle can speak to that. I mean, it is a very fast-paced process because the committees don't even go until the end of session. The committees go until the deadline by which they need to have their bills reported out, which is a month and a half before we get to the end of session. So yeah.
If I might just add the PS, I'm sure I definitely know what you're talking about from my experience with the education committee. And even when we know 6 months in advance a topic I'm going to be briefing on. We still can't get it scheduled in time. So to work a bill. So definitely hear you. I do think it would be the exception, not the rule, that something could be turned around quickly, but I thought it was at least worth mentioning. So thank you.
Yes. Suzanne, on the topic of resource allocation, can you refresh my memory on that?
Yes, with LD2, which became Chapter 21, there was no funding set aside. I think that we could look to see if there is available funding for this purpose, and I'd be happy to talk with Donna and let you know. The other thing I just wanted to quickly point out is that in a first regular session, the other complicating factor is that the deadline by which bills are filed at all is the earliest it ever is the third Friday in December. So if 2,500 bill requests come in on the third Friday in December, the bills themselves then don't actually get drafted and printed, and they're still getting printed in March and into April, depending. So the idea, and that does complicate the ability to, if you got a bill that was printed at the end of March and it was identified as one that would be great for a racial impact statement, it would be very difficult to have that done. So
I think on the matter of resources, I would in my clarifying point or my addendum to Representative Talbot Ross's point would be that the Leg Council of the 131st consider an allocation from the Legislative Council budget or from the legislature's budget to contract with organizations, well, depending on response to some kind of, whatever the process would be, RFP or whatever. But I think whether it be one organization or multiple organizations, I think the process likely in the near term would stand outside. I think hiring individuals would be a lot more challenging. We moved heaven and earth to get one new economic analysis person added to the staff on the nonpartisan staff side. So I don't think forward. I just think that would probably be the easiest process in the immediate but I do think it's worth consideration of getting true resources allocated so that people are being paid for the work that they're doing and the time that they're spending on this. The only other thing that I had on my list here was adding another recommendation that the 131st consider repealing Section 2 of the law that resulted from LD2 and replacing it with a new Section 2 that would concretely outline the process by which the racial impact statements are produced and how they're requested and all that stuff. I think that would be obviously in the form of a bill. So a bill would have to be submitted for the legislature's consideration in the 131st, and it probably would be best that bill get carried over until the second session and until this extension of the pilot is realized and we have a true understanding of what the process will be, what the process looks like, and getting it into statute so that it is concretely there for the future. So that would be my only additional point that I had on my list for our recommendation to Leg Council to then recommend to the next Leg Council. If we can all follow that. And just process wise, I think it may be worth taking a formal vote. So I think I'm not concluding I'm not concluding our recommendation. I'll go back to the well one more time before concluding getting to a motion or to a vote, but I think it'd be worthwhile taking a vote. And for those who are absent, asking them how they like their vote to be recorded. If they want to produce a different recommendation for those who are absent, I think they should certainly be permitted to do so. And then I think that the vote and the recommendation should be communicated to the full council, and then the council should get that report back, reported out by a member of the subcommittee, and then a vote should occur at our next council meeting as to what the recommendation will be to the full 131st Ledge Council, if that makes sense. Are there any other, I think right now it's the Talbot Ross Fecto consensus recommendation. We'll see if anyone else disagrees with us, Representative Talbot Ross, for those who are not here. But is there anything else that we haven't included in our recommendation that should be included?
Mr. Speaker, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. Awesome. And if it's possible to include the memos that were provided to us in an email to Ledge Council, I think that would be the full Ledge Council. I think that would be really helpful too, so they can have these documents before them. But seeing no other comments, take a vote on this recommendation as outlined with the members that are present. Just a show of hands will do. Unanimous of those present, and we'll make sure we get the votes of the members who are absent from today's subcommittee meeting. Any other business for the subcommittee? And does this conclude the work of this subcommittee, or how does that work?
I think the making the recommendation to the full council is really the conclusion of the subcommittee's work. The law does direct the full council to make the recommendation to the next council of the 131st. So depending on how you look at it, that's the conclusion. But just from a procedural point of view, prior to collecting the votes of the absent members, would you like us to sort of draft up your motion so that they can see it in writing rather than trying to find the clip in the video?
I think that would be helpful. I would hate for them to take a vote without knowing what we said.
And maybe before we share it with the full subcommittee, we'll make sure that we've captured it correctly beforehand, and we'll send it to each of you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Great. Any other comments or questions or anything?
Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to take a quick moment to thank our researchers who've done just an incredible job given the time constraints and the resource limitations and lack of sometimes real clarity. And just want to really highlight and lift up our appreciation for their work, but also wanted to pass along sincere appreciation to the hard work that both Director Fox and Director Gresser have contributed to this process. It was it was hard to get our arms around and to really figure out what the first steps were for the subcommittee. So just the leadership and the brilliant direction that Ms. Fox and Ms. Gresser led to this process, I found to be really quite valuable, and wanted to say thank you to everyone.
Yeah, I would definitely echo those words, and just want to put a finer point on just my remarks that I made earlier. I don't think any of us expected the pilot to be the perfect capture of how this will work concretely. I think we recognized from the very beginning that there were inadequacies in when the process was launching and how it would apply. And I think the point of the pilot, this initial pilot, was to get some key concrete takeaways, which we've clearly discussed during today's meeting, so that we can make better decisions about what this looks like moving forward. And I think the pilot did its job in giving us a real sense of what will make this process better, how it will shape the work of the legislature, and how we can make sure that whether it be drawing conclusions on the impact of bills or drawing conclusions about where data is or isn't. I think we have already seen from this pilot that the racial impact statements will have an important role to play in how we shape the future of our state, and making sure that communities get the support that they need, and that we address some of the challenges that we face across the state, and that some communities have faced historically for a very long time. And so I'm really grateful to Representative Talbot Ross specifically, who has taken the lead on this issue, who sponsored LD2, and has been a champion for finding a way to make this a reality for the Maine legislature and for policymaking at large. So, and again, I would echo my thanks to the researchers and to the Permit Commission and to the nonpartisan staff of the legislature. So thank you all for the work you've done. Great. I will assume the meeting adjourned. Is that okay?
Move to adjourn.
By implication, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you all.
Speaker.